Hey, my name is John, and today I'll be going over part 2 and the final part of the closed patches series. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, make sure to stop this video and watch that one first before continuing, just because I'll be going over a lot of the content and information that I already discussed in the first part of the video. So we know the 3-step method in order for us to approach these types of closed patches questions. Read over the entire thing, then look at potential answers and go sequentially top to bottom. We have certain sentences that have been omitted, but how do we know which one from the box to actually put in? In order for us to know how to actually do it, I've kind of segmented in a couple of different techniques. First one being the more basic and fundamental ones, and then the second one being the more advanced ones. I recommend using the basic and fundamental ones first before you're moving on to the advanced one. But sometimes, and naturally what you're doing right now is you might even be doing some of these techniques, but you're not even actively aware of it. The first fundamental processing strategy is guessing. This is a bit of a no-brainer here, and usually should be given in as a last resort. If you don't know the answer to the question and you've used every other technique and you're running out of time, you have to do this technique in order for you actually to answer the question at all and give yourself a 1 in 6 or 1 in 8 shot in answering correctly. You have to guess. The worst thing you can actually do is not guess at all if you have no idea and just leaving it blank, because that is 100% chance of you getting it incorrect. The second strategy is the local questioning of the text. This means that you have to find out what is close to the missing or the omitted section. Read the sentence before, read the sentence after, and try to have an understanding and a feel of what will be in the missing spot. The next technique is paraphrasing and interpreting the meaning. This is particularly useful when if you don't understand a certain section of the paragraph, or if you don't know a certain word, try to change it into your own words so you can try to make logical sense of what's going on in the first place. If there's multiple words that you are unsure of, paraphrasing is a fantastic way to actually reword it in a way which makes sense to you. And even if you're not 100% confident, you will have a lot more idea on how to actually approach the question in the first place and have an inkling on what can be in that spot. The next basic and fundamental strategy is underlining. This is when you underline certain keywords in the paragraph. It doesn't have to be the missing spots because you're just underlining the areas that you have to actually answer. It's actually good to answer the keywords and underline them. What I like to do is underline, and the reason why is because I can actually read much quicker when I'm underlining it, whether it be with my finger or a pencil. So the reading speed is actually cut a lot more faster, and I can read a lot more quicker when I'm underlining and tracing out. The next fundamental strategy is identifying and recognizing areas of weakness. So why is this important, you may ask? Well, it's important for you to know that if you don't know a certain part and you've kind of used some of the strategies that I've mentioned already, such as paraphrasing or underlining certain areas that you're not too sure about, and you've given it a go already, you sometimes have to move on. Once you recognize a paragraph or a question is too difficult, it's a waste of time if you spend 5, 10, 15 minutes on this one question before you move on. I know I said in the first approach is that you have to go top down, but if you're stuck on the first question, that means you'll never have time to answer the rest of the questions if you're spending so much time on the first one. Sometimes recognizing and identifying areas of weakness and areas that you're not too sure about is key, because you can come back to it later on. And the nature of these questions is if you come back to a question later on, and if you don't understand it right now, chances are you'll have a smaller selection of potential answers that can be fit into that area. So your likelihood of getting that question right when you're coming back to it at the very end will be much higher. Another technique that I want to bring to your attention is rereading. So this is a bit of a no-brainer, especially because if you follow the 3-approach method, you read the whole text about 3 times. However, if you still don't understand a certain sentence, or if you're reading but you're not actually fully remembering and understanding or comprehending what is even going on in the first place, sometimes it is important for you to always reread and to double check. And the reason why this is so critical is because in the closed patches questions, what usually happens is they put these difficult words, and sometimes they're important, but other times they're here to kind of throw you off. They might have long names, long dates, scientific terms, which have little to no relevance, but while you're reading it, sometimes if you not fully concentrating or your attention span is a little bit short, you're reading a whole paragraph And if I had to ask you what's going on, you might be like, what is going on? I have no idea what I actually just read. I read it out loud, I was underlining, but I have no idea, and it's not really triggering in my mind. So this technique is important because if you reread it with a lot more focus, you'll actually understand a lot more. Another technique I want to bring to your attention is organizational patterns, specifically on simplistic. So the cues associated with this, in order for you to discover and infer different meaning in the paragraph, is through simplistic. Some examples include commas, dot points, or even sequential numbering. So for instance, if they have 1, 2, missing space, and then 4, you already have an understanding that with simplistic and utilizing this technique, you can actually have a guess for that missing spot. Chances are it's going to be a 3. So if you look at the potential answers and there's a 3 that starts with it, that could be the answer. So that's a very basic example of what may actually occur. Chances are it will be a lot more advanced in the selective exam. However, you just want to be aware of this technique and then apply it later on if the situation does occur. The last fundamental strategy for you to be aware of is organizational patterns. And this one is specifically on comparing and contrasting. So the cues associated with this, in order for you to know the meaning in the paragraph in itself, is through comparing and contrasting. An example of this is in one sentence, if they talk about the color black, maybe in the next sentence, it's going to be the color white. And if that next sentence is actually a missing area, and for you to actually fill in the blank in the closed passage, then that could be the potential answer. Or if you're tall, you could be short. Or if they're talking about someone's height, they might also associate with that, and also in the next sentence, they might talk about someone's weight. In the next section, I'll now go over the advanced processing strategies that can be used. Like I said, it's important to know the fundamental and basics first, and before you kind of dive deep into these advanced ones. But sometimes, especially with the sample question, the sample paper that they've kind of released already in the closed passage question, it is kind of important for you to know some of the more advanced techniques because you need it in order to answer those questions. The first strategy is analyzing grammatical and syntactical structure of the sentence or paragraph in itself. This one involves having a good understanding on grammar and sentence structure and what kind of makes sense. An example of this where if there's a potential answer box and it says, this is because XYZ, you already kind of know that that can't be the first sentence in a paragraph because it's trying to explain a point. Usually the explain, if you follow the PIL structure, is in the middle of a paragraph so that if there's a missing area and which is at the beginning of a paragraph, and that's the closed passage question that you have trying to answer, you know it can't be the potential answer that's centered on this is because that's an explain question. So this technique is quite useful in that regard. The next technique is regulating textual management. So this one's already centered on the approach. So if you answer the first question, go to the fourth question, second question, sixth question, etc., etc. How do you best approach it? If you saw this first video, this is already built into it. Try to go top down, and that's the best bet. However, even if you go top down, sometimes you could also utilize this technique using textual management. So you can, if you identify that one section is a lot more difficult and you evaluate that and identify that's your area of weakness, move on to it, come back to it later on. But if you know that every question's difficult and you're really not too sure about anything, just go top down, and that's probably your best approach. The third advanced technique that I would like to share with you guys is monitor your comprehension. So while you're reading and understanding the actual paragraph or the actual text in itself, just make sure that it's triggering in your mind and you know word by word what is going on. If after a sentence or a couple words you're like, what did I just read? Then you have to monitor your comprehension and reread it again. That's when you're utilizing another technique and you have to actually know. If you're unsure about one thing, you have to recognize it and stop what you're doing and reread it again. It's the most foolish thing if you're actually just reading the entire text and you don't actually know what they're talking about and you have to read the entire thing again. It's better for you to identify it early on. If you're not too sure what's going on in the first place, read a sentence, don't know what's going on, read it again. Read a paragraph, not too sure what's going on at all, read the paragraph again. The next technique that I would like to go over is inferencing. So this is when you use your prior knowledge that you already know from outside of the comprehension text in itself, based on vocabulary, your readings of not just books, novels, etc., and the actual real world, and you can apply it in this scenario. So using your own knowledge, you can actually try to guess and infer meaning and words that you're not too sure about previously. Try to use this technique, inferencing, by applying the knowledge that you already know innately and try to fit it in that situation. You can actually try to guess some of the meaning, and even if you're not sure 100% of what is accurate, what I usually teach my students is, as long as you're 80% or you get the gist of it, that's enough. You don't need to know specifically the word-by-word definition of what's in the dictionary. I see some tutors actually try to tell their kids, you have to learn 10 words from a dictionary every single day, so that over time you can learn, in a week, 70 words. It's not practical, it's not efficient, and it's so outdated. What you actually need to do is make sure that you're growing your vocabulary, but also using techniques like inferencing, that if you're not too sure about a word, based on the surrounding words, you can still infer the meaning of what's going on. The next technique is visualizing. So this is when you actually visualize information and what's going on in the text in your mind. Typically, I don't usually use this just because I have a pretty good grasp over a wide range of words and meanings, and I kind of know what's going on. However, if you're not too sure about certain words, maybe you're a visual learner and not a kinesthetic learner or one of the other learners, this is when you actually try to imagine what's going on in your mind. So that if you're reading a text and a paragraph on an interview or about a certain animal, this is when in your mind you can actually try to picture it and try to draw meanings from it for you to actually know the potential answer of what's going on. The next technique is integrating and evaluating the information that's put forward to you. So if you make a guess and it's an informed decision on what is in that missing space, using this technique, you actually question it. Is this actually the right answer? What are the potential answers that can actually be put into here? And if you're tossing up between, or it could be A, or it could be C, what is in that actual spot, then you can actually try to evaluate which one is more applicable for that question. You may read through different sections of the text as well. If a certain question has a question that you were tossing up in a previous question, then you already know the question won't be A for the previous one. So this technique is using the process of elimination, as well as your ability to evaluate information from all across the text. Over time, this may become a lot more easier, but when you're first starting out, in order for you to improve and actually utilize this skill, it's important for you to always try to question your answer. Is this actually right? Is there potential answers? And try to do past papers. That'll naturally make you do this a lot more. And maybe for the first couple ones, you could do this with a teacher, parent, whoever it is. And they can also say, are you sure about this? And that makes you think and use this technique a lot more practically as well. The next technique is abandoning. This is a lot better than just guessing straight up if you don't know a question. Abandoning means if you spend enough time on it and you're not too sure about it, you write down potential answers it could be. So if you're tossing up a couple of responses and you move on. At the very end, you come back to it because you would have eliminated some of your potential answers that you're considering in the first place, which might be correct, and you have a high chance of actually answering it in the right way possible. Abandoning is not a bad technique at all. I try to recommend it as much as possible, especially if you're just starting out and you're not really comfortable with these closed passage questions. It's actually quite critical in order for you to answer the entire questions as well as finish the paragraph or the entire text in a good time frame. The second last advanced strategy that I like to share is organizational patterns based on time order. So this is cues associated, which is typically inverse chronological or chronological order. This is quite important, especially with closed passages that's related to lots of dates. So it's the biography of a certain person. Chances are there'll be lots of dates throughout. And based on the dates, and usually this is sequential, if it's chronological or if it's inverse chronological, you can actually narrow down the responses quite quickly. Over time, if you do a lot of these practice papers, practice questions as well, it will make you a lot more better in approaching these questions naturally as well. The last advanced strategy is organizational patterns relating to cause and effect. The cues associated with this is that if there is an action, there has to be a corresponding reaction. So there are going to be some signpost words that will help guide you and indicate different meanings depending on how they are used. So just make sure you're aware of which words are these cause and effect questions. So if there's a sentence that's all about a cause, The next sentence, if it's a blank area, it might be the effect. Basically, all of the closed passage questions can be answered correctly using a mixture or a combination of the techniques that I've discussed, whether it be the more fundamental ones or the more advanced processing strategies. This goes across whether if you're attending James Roos or schools like Girraween, Penrith, or even if you don't even make it into selective schools, they'll also be using these techniques as well. However, the difference between those who actually answer the questions correctly and the people who do not answer the questions correctly, even if they're using the same technique, is their application of it. For example, students may actually try to utilize the technique of using grammatical and syntactical knowledge in order to answer a question, or try to use inferencing to answer a question. But if their baseline knowledge or their vocabulary is so low in the first place, where even basic or even semi-difficult or intermediate questions or words they have a limited understanding of, they won't actually be able to utilize that technique to the best possible way. Inferencing is fantastic if you already have a broad vocabulary and you can draw on your own words and experiences in order to answer the question. Same goes with grammatical and syntactical knowledge. Therefore, knowledge of the techniques in itself is insufficient into answering all the questions correctly. What you need to know is you need to know the techniques, and you need to have the right ability to apply it in the first place. Practice questions can help, but usually if you're guided by someone who actually knows what they're talking about, that will help the most to get you from this level to the level that we actually kind of need as well. If you want me to apply some of these strategies and techniques in a more practical setting, let me know. Usually I do this in one of our lessons, or our team does it in our one-on-ones with individual students. But if this is a huge interest, write it down in the comments below and we'll definitely try to help you out. We can easily go over an example, a practice paper, whatever it is, let me know and we'll try to assist you guys where we can. Obviously, we can't go to the level of depth that we do in our lessons, but we can try to share what we can, especially because the exam is just around the corner and these changes are so huge. So hopefully this helps you guys out, or visit bingsacademy.com and you can have a chat with us over there. Thank you, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.